The war in the skies over Europe created legends and erased names as fast as burning planes fell from the clouds. Some became heroes on posters, others vanished without a trace. But there was one pilot whose story began with disaster. His aircraft was torn apart over enemy territory, and he found himself facing a reality where every step could lead to betrayal. His path involved secret hideouts, dangerous crossings, and encounters that even Allied command preferred to keep silent. This man transformed from a fugitive into a hunter, from a target into a nightmare for the enemy. His name became a symbol of courage, and his deeds a subject of debate and legend. To understand how a farm boy from a forgotten corner of America returned and carved his place in history, we must look into the dark and perilous chapters that still puzzle researchers today. The story begins far from European battlefields, in the hollows of Lincoln County, West Virginia. Don't forget to like, leave a comment, and subscribe. You are not here by accident. Chuck Yeager was born into a world where machines mattered as much as muscle. His father worked as a driller in the natural gas fields that dotted the Appalachian landscape. The family lived modestly in the small town of Myra, where the rhythm of life moved with the seasons and the demands of industrial work. From childhood, Yeager displayed an uncanny ability to understand how things worked. While other boys played with store-bought toys, he dismantled engines, repaired farm equipment, and learned to shoot with the precision that mountain families demanded. His hands seemed to know their way around any mechanical contraption, a skill that would prove invaluable in cockpits over Europe. The mountains taught him patience and self-reliance. West Virginia children learned early that help might be hours away, that you solved problems with whatever tools you had at hand. These lessons shaped a mindset that would serve him well when faced with mechanical failures at 30,000 feet or enemy patrols in occupied France. When America entered the war in December 1941, young men across the country rushed to enlist. Yeager, barely 18, saw his opportunity not just to serve his country, but to escape the limitations of small-town life. He'd always been drawn to the sky, watching crop dusters work the valleys and dreaming of flight. The Army Air Forces offered both adventure and a chance to put his mechanical skills to use. His application process revealed the same steady competence that marked everything he did. Physical tests showed excellent reflexes and keen eyesight. Mechanical aptitude scores placed him in the top percentile. But perhaps most importantly, psychological evaluations noted his unusual calm under pressure, a trait that would define his entire career. California's clear skies and endless horizons provided the perfect classroom for America's newest pilots. At Victorville Army Flying School, Yeager encountered aircraft more sophisticated than anything he'd imagined back in West Virginia. The Fairchild PT-19 trainer introduced him to the fundamentals of flight, but it was the transition to more advanced aircraft that truly tested his abilities. The learning curve was steep and unforgiving. Many cadets washed out during these crucial months, unable to master the complex coordination required for combat flying. Yeager not only survived but excelled, displaying an intuitive understanding of aircraft behavior that impressed even veteran instructors. His mechanical background allowed him to diagnose problems that other pilots missed, often preventing dangerous situations before they developed. Advanced training brought him face-to-face with the Bell P-39 Airacobra, an aircraft that would become his first taste of high-performance flying. The Airacobra was notorious among pilots for its unusual design. The engine mounted behind the pilot, connected to the propeller by a long drive shaft. Many pilots found the configuration unsettling, but Yeager adapted quickly, learning to work with the aircraft's unique characteristics rather than against them. His instructors noted his exceptional gunnery skills, honed by years of hunting in West Virginia's forests. What came naturally to a mountain boy, leading a target, compensating for wind and distance, translated perfectly to aerial combat. Mock dogfights revealed not just technical proficiency, but tactical intelligence, an ability to think several moves ahead while managing the complex demands of high-speed flight. By graduation, Yeager had established himself as one of the most promising pilots in his class. His combination of mechanical expertise, natural flying ability, and cool temperament marked him as ideal material for combat operations. The war in Europe was reaching its crescendo, and experienced pilots were desperately needed. Soon, he would discover just how deadly the skies over Nazi-occupied territory could be. The transition from training to combat came with shocking suddenness. England in early 1944 was an island under siege, bristling with airfields and aircraft as the Allies prepared for the massive invasion of Europe. Yeager arrived at RAF Leiston, home to the 357th Fighter Group, where he would fly the legendary North American P-51 Mustang. The Mustang represented everything American industrial might could produce: sleek, fast, and deadly when properly handled. Its distinctive bubble canopy provided unprecedented visibility, crucial for spotting enemy fighters in the vast expanses of European sky. The aircraft's long range meant escort missions deep into German territory, where Luftwaffe pilots waited with years of combat experience and intimate knowledge of their homeland's geography. His first combat missions were milk runs compared to what lay ahead: escort duties for bomber formations striking targets in occupied France. The sight of hundreds of flying fortresses and liberators stretching across the horizon was both inspiring and sobering. Each one carried 10 men whose lives depended on fighters like Yeager's Mustang keeping enemy interceptors at bay. The reality of aerial combat proved far more chaotic than training had suggested. Radio chatter filled with urgent warnings, aircraft appearing and disappearing in seconds. The constant need to maintain formation while scanning for threats. Yeager's West Virginia composure served him well in this environment, allowing him to process information quickly while maintaining the disciplined flying that kept pilots alive. His first confirmed victory came during a mission over France, when a German Focke-Wulf 190 attempted to attack a damaged bomber struggling to maintain altitude. The engagement lasted mere seconds, a brief burst of machine gun fire that sent the enemy fighter spiraling earthward. There was no celebration, no time for reflection. Combat was business, deadly and efficient. Yet even as his confidence grew with each mission, Yeager was learning the harsh mathematics of aerial warfare. Good pilots died alongside poor ones. Luck mattered as much as skill. Mechanical failures claimed aircraft regardless of their pilot's ability. The sky over Europe was becoming a graveyard for young men from both sides of the conflict. March 5, 1944, dawned clear and cold across the airfields of eastern England. The mission briefing revealed another deep penetration raid into occupied France. Targets near Bordeaux, well within range of established Luftwaffe bases. Intelligence reports suggested moderate fighter opposition, but veteran pilots knew that estimates often proved optimistic when measured against reality. Yeager's P-51B carried the standard load of ammunition and fuel for extended operations over enemy territory. As Tail End Charlie, he flew the most exposed position in the four-plane formation, responsible for watching the sky behind and above while maintaining proper spacing with his flight leader. It was a position that required constant vigilance and absolute trust in one's wingman. The flight proceeded normally for the first hour, crossing the English Channel at altitude and penetrating French airspace without incident. Below, The occupied countryside spread out in patchwork patterns of fields and forests, deceptively peaceful from 25,000 feet. Radio chatter remained minimal, following standard procedure for operations behind enemy lines. The attack came without warning. 3 German Focke-Wulf 190 fighters dove from the sun, targeting the vulnerable tail position with devastating precision. 20mm cannon fire tore through Yeager's aircraft, severing elevator cables and wounding him slightly in the right hand. The Mustang became unflyable in seconds, control surfaces failing as hydraulic fluid sprayed across the cockpit. With no choice remaining, Yeager pulled his aircraft's nose up and bailed out at 18,000 feet, making what he later described as a successful landing. His parachute carried him down through enemy territory, while his fighter exploded upon impact with the French countryside. Within minutes, he had transformed from hunter to hunted, alone in a landscape crawling with German patrols and collaborators. The sudden transition from aerial combat to ground survival shocked even experienced pilots. One moment flying at nearly 400 miles per hour, 6 miles above the earth, the next standing in a French field with enemy forces closing in from all directions. Everything Yeager had learned about survival in the West Virginia wilderness would now be tested against the organized manhunt of a modern police state. The parachute landing left Yeager bruised but mobile, his wounded hand painful but functional. Training had emphasized the critical importance of the first hours after being shot down. German search teams would be dispatched immediately, supported by local police and informants who knew the territory intimately. Survival depended on moving fast and finding help before the net closed completely. French civilians who witnessed the parachute landing faced an agonizing choice. Helping a downed Allied airman meant risking not just their own lives, but the lives of their families. The German occupation had made collaboration a matter of survival for many, while resistance carried the promise of terrible retribution. Yet across occupied Europe, ordinary people repeatedly chose courage over safety. The French resistance, known as the Maquis, made contact with Yeager within days of his landing. These were not professional soldiers, but farmers, teachers, and shopkeepers who had organized into networks dedicated to helping Allied personnel escape capture. Their knowledge of local terrain and German patrol patterns proved invaluable as they guided the American pilot through a landscape bristling with checkpoints and surveillance. The journey toward Spain became a weeks-long chess match between hunters and prey. Movement occurred primarily at night, with daylight hours spent hidden in barns, caves, or safe houses maintained by resistance sympathizers. Each day brought new risks as German forces intensified their search efforts, following a trail that seemed to grow colder with each passing hour. The escape route led through the Pyrenees Mountains, where smugglers and resistance fighters had established pathways used by hundreds of evaders throughout the war. On March 30th, 1944, Yeager finally crossed into neutral Spain, reaching safety after nearly a month behind enemy lines. Spanish authorities interned Allied personnel according to international law, but the process was largely formalized courtesy. Within weeks, arrangements were made for repatriation through British diplomatic channels. Yeager returned to England on May 15, 1944, resuming his position with the 357th Fighter Group, despite regulations that typically prohibited shot-down pilots from returning to combat operations. His successful escape had violated every statistical prediction about survival rates for downed airmen. The experience had tested his resourcefulness, courage, and ability to trust strangers with his life. More importantly, it had revealed the extraordinary heroism of ordinary French citizens who risked everything to help a foreign pilot they had never met and would likely never see again. Returning to combat carried emotional weight that few who hadn't experienced it could understand. The cockpit of a P-51 Mustang became both sanctuary and battlefield, a familiar environment where split-second decisions meant the difference between life and death. For Yeager, the transition back to aerial combat felt like coming home to a dangerous but comprehensible world. His squadron mates welcomed him back with the mixture of relief and superstition common among combat pilots. Successful evaders were considered lucky, and luck was a commodity in desperately short supply over the skies of Nazi Germany. But Yeager's value went beyond mere symbolism. His experience behind enemy lines had sharpened survival instincts already honed by months of aerial combat. The air war over Europe was intensifying as the Allies prepared for the invasion of Normandy. German fighter strength, while still formidable, was being slowly worn down by the relentless pressure of daily missions. Experienced Luftwaffe pilots were becoming increasingly scarce, replaced by hastily trained novices who lacked the combat experience that had once made German aviation so formidable. Yeager's hunting instincts, developed in West Virginia forests, translated perfectly to the three-dimensional chess game of aerial combat. He learned to read the sky like terrain, recognizing patterns in cloud formations, contrails, and radio chatter that revealed enemy intentions. His mechanical background allowed him to push his aircraft to performance levels that other pilots couldn't safely achieve. The accumulation of victories followed naturally from this combination of skills. Each confirmed kill represented not just personal achievement, but contribution to the larger strategic effort to establish Allied air superiority. German pilots shot down meant fewer threats to bomber formations, fewer interdiction missions against Allied ground forces, fewer obstacles to the invasion that everyone knew was coming. His reputation within the 357th Fighter Group grew with each successful mission. Fellow pilots sought his advice on combat tactics and aircraft maintenance. Ground crews took special pride in servicing his Mustang, knowing that their work directly supported one of the squadron's most effective pilots. By summer 1944, Chuck Yeager had established himself as one of the premier fighter aces in the European theater. The transformation from shot-down evader to squadron hero represented more than personal redemption. It embodied the resilience and adaptability that would define American military aviation for generations to come. Young men from farms and factories were learning to master the most sophisticated weapon systems ever created, then using those skills to dominate skies that had once belonged to their enemies. The months following D-Day brought a new intensity to the air war over Europe. German resistance stiffened as Allied forces pushed deeper into occupied territory. But the Luftwaffe's ability to mount effective opposition was crumbling under the weight of fuel shortages, pilot losses, and overwhelming Allied numerical superiority. For aces like Yeager, this period offered both unprecedented opportunities and increasingly desperate German tactics. His most spectacular day came when he shot down 5 German aircraft in a single mission, an extraordinary feat that placed him among the elite of American fighter pilots. The engagement unfolded over Germany itself, where a formation of Messerschmitt fighters attempted to intercept an Allied bomber stream. What followed was a one-sided battle that demonstrated the complete reversal of fortunes since the dark days of 1942. The mechanics of multiple kills revealed both Yeager's tactical genius and the superior performance of American aircraft. The P-51 Mustang's speed and maneuverability allowed him to engage multiple targets while maintaining enough energy to disengage if the situation became unfavorable. His gunnery, still guided by the hunting instincts learned in West Virginia, placed bullets precisely where they would cause maximum damage with minimum ammunition expenditure. But the war was also revealing new German technologies that threatened to upset Allied air superiority. The appearance of jet-powered Messerschmitt 262 fighters shocked pilots accustomed to propeller-driven opponents. These revolutionary aircraft possessed speed advantages that made traditional fighter tactics obsolete, forcing rapid adaptation to an entirely new form of aerial warfare. Yeager encountered these new German jets during several missions, successfully engaging Me-262s that represented the future of military aviation. The experience provided invaluable insights into jet aircraft behavior that would prove crucial during his later career as a test pilot. Few Allied pilots had the opportunity to study jet performance so closely in combat conditions. As 1945 dawned, the Luftwaffe was clearly a spent force. Fuel shortages grounded many aircraft, while experienced pilots had largely been killed or captured. The missions that once required careful planning and desperate fighting were becoming routine sweeps over increasingly defenseless territory. For fighter pilots like Yeager, the war had essentially ended months before the official surrender. The final tallies told the story of American air power's complete victory over German aviation. Yeager finished the war having flown 64 combat missions and shot down 13 German aircraft officially, with several more probable kills that couldn't be confirmed. His survival rate alone placed him among the statistical elite of combat aviation, where the majority of pilots were killed, wounded, or captured before completing their tours. More importantly, his evolution from inexperienced trainee to combat ace represented the broader transformation of American military aviation. An industrial democracy had taken farm boys and factory workers, taught them to fly the most advanced aircraft in the world, and unleashed them against enemies who had dominated European skies for years. The results spoke for themselves in the smoking ruins of the Third Reich. The end of the war in Europe brought strange emotions for combat pilots who had spent years living on the edge of survival. Peace meant safety, but it also meant the end of an experience that had defined their young adult lives. For men like Chuck Yeager, who had found both purpose and identity in aerial combat, the transition to peacetime service posed challenges as complex as any they had faced over enemy territory. His record spoke for itself in the cold mathematics that military organizations used to measure effectiveness. 13 confirmed victories, 64 combat missions completed, successful evasion and escape after being shot down behind enemy lines. These statistics placed him firmly among the elite of American fighter pilots, but they barely captured the full scope of his contribution to Allied victory. The qualities that made Yeager exceptional extended far beyond mere marksmanship or flying skill. His mechanical aptitude had prevented numerous aircraft failures that could have resulted in casualties or mission failures. His calm demeanor under pressure had inspired confidence in newer pilots, who looked to experienced hands for guidance during their own first encounters with combat. Perhaps most significantly, his successful escape from occupied France had demonstrated the kind of personal courage and resourcefulness that went far beyond normal military duties. The 2 months he spent evading capture had tested every aspect of his character, revealing reserves of determination and adaptability that would serve him well in the years ahead. The broader significance of pilots like Yeager lay in what they represented about American society and its capacity for producing effective military personnel. These were not professional soldiers from military families, but ordinary citizens who had answered their country's call and discovered extraordinary capabilities within themselves. They embodied the democratic ideal that free societies could produce warriors as effective as any created by authoritarian regimes. Their success had profound implications for post-war military planning. The Army Air Forces, soon to become the independent United States Air Force, had proven that strategic bombing and fighter escorts could achieve decisive results when properly employed. The lessons learned over European skies would shape military doctrine for the emerging Cold War conflict with the Soviet Union. For Yeager personally, the end of the war marked not a conclusion, but a transition. His combination of technical expertise and proven courage under fire made him an ideal candidate for the experimental flight testing programs that would define military aviation in the jet age. The same qualities that had made him a successful fighter pilot would soon place him at the forefront of humanity's push into the supersonic realm. The boy from West Virginia had become a symbol of American military aviation's coming of age. His story represented not just individual achievement, but collective triumph. Proof that a democratic society could produce pilots capable of mastering any challenge the future might present. In the laboratories and test facilities of the post-war period, that proof would be tested against barriers that had never been crossed by human flight. Peace brought new challenges that were perhaps more daunting than anything the war had offered. In secret facilities across the American West, engineers and test pilots were pushing the boundaries of human knowledge about high-speed flight. The sound barrier, that invisible wall at approximately 700 miles per hour, had claimed the lives of several test pilots who had attempted to pierce it in conventional aircraft. The Bell X-1 program represented America's most ambitious attempt to answer fundamental questions about supersonic flight. The rocket-powered aircraft looked more like a bullet than a conventional airplane, its design based on the shape of rifle ammunition that engineers knew could travel faster than sound. But the transition from theory to reality would require a test pilot with extraordinary skill and courage. Yeager's selection for the program reflected his unique combination of qualifications. His combat experience had proven his ability to remain calm under extreme pressure. His mechanical background meant he could understand the complex systems that kept experimental aircraft functioning. Most importantly, his demonstrated survival skills suggested he might live through flights that pushed into unknown territory. The approach to supersonic flight required methodical progression through a series of test flights, each one probing closer to the sound barrier that had killed other pilots. The experimental aircraft was carried to altitude beneath a B-29 bomber, then released through the bomb bay to begin its rocket-powered flight toward speeds no human had ever achieved. October 14, 1947, dawned clear over the Mojave Desert. The Bell X-1, nicknamed Glamorous Glennis after Yeager's wife, dropped away from its mothership at 25,000 feet and ignited its rocket engine for the flight into history. What happened next would redefine humanity's understanding of flight itself. The experimental aircraft reached 1,127 kilometers per hour, 700 miles per hour, achieving Mach 1.06 and becoming the first airplane to fly faster than the speed of sound. The passage through the sound barrier proved almost anticlimactic, lacking the catastrophic structural failure that many engineers had predicted. The achievement represented more than a single pilot's courage or a particular aircraft's capabilities. It opened entire new realms of flight that would lead directly to military jets capable of supersonic combat, and eventually to spacecraft that could carry humans beyond Earth's atmosphere. The farm boy from West Virginia had literally broken through the barrier that separated propeller-driven aviation from the jet age. For Yeager personally, breaking the sound barrier completed a transformation that had begun in the skies over Europe. The same instincts that had made him a successful fighter pilot, the ability to read aircraft behavior, to remain calm under extreme conditions, to push machines to their absolute limits, had carried him beyond the boundaries of previous human experience. The success of the Bell X-1 program opened doors to increasingly ambitious projects that pushed the boundaries of experimental flight. Yeager found himself at the center of America's effort to develop military aircraft capable of operating at previously impossible speeds and altitudes. Each new program brought challenges that required not just piloting skill, but the ability to think like an engineer and scientist. High-altitude flights in rocket-powered aircraft revealed entirely new categories of problems. The thin atmosphere at extreme altitudes provided little aerodynamic control, making conventional flying techniques useless. Temperature extremes created mechanical failures that had never been encountered in traditional aircraft. The margin for error became so thin that survival often depended on split-second decisions based on incomplete information. His reputation as a test pilot grew with each successful program. The Bell X-1A pushed even deeper into supersonic territory, achieving speeds that approached Mach 2. Other experimental aircraft explored different aspects of high-performance flight, some focusing on extreme altitude, others on maneuverability at supersonic speeds. Each program added to the growing body of knowledge that would define military aviation for decades. Yet even as his achievements accumulated, larger historical forces were reshaping the landscape of experimental flight. The Soviet Union's surprise launch of Sputnik in 1957 created a national crisis that redirected American space efforts toward civilian rather than military control. The newly created National Aeronautics and Space Administration began recruiting its own astronaut corps, establishing selection criteria that inadvertently excluded pilots like Yeager. The irony was profound. The same test pilot who had broken the sound barrier and pushed experimental aircraft to unprecedented performance levels found himself shut out of the space program due to educational requirements that had little relevance to his proven abilities. His lack of a college degree, meaningless when facing the unknown challenges of supersonic flight, became a bureaucratic obstacle to spaceflight. Military conflicts arose as the Air Force fought to maintain control over its most experienced test pilots. The service had invested years in developing Yeager's expertise, only to see civilian agencies attempting to recruit the same personnel for competing programs. The resulting tensions created professional complications that affected careers and entire research programs. His continued work in military test programs produced achievements that were less celebrated but equally significant. Breaking altitude records, testing new generations of fighter aircraft, and developing the training programs that would prepare other pilots for experimental flight. These contributions shaped American military aviation even as public attention focused on the space race. The missed opportunity of spaceflight represented more than personal disappointment. It symbolized the broader challenge facing military aviation as it competed with civilian agencies for resources, personnel, and public attention. The same democratic society that had produced effective fighter pilots was now generating bureaucratic obstacles that prevented optimal use of proven talent. The decades following his active flight testing career saw Chuck Yeager's story become increasingly mythologized in American popular culture. Books, films, and documentaries transformed the West Virginia farm boy into a symbol of American technological achievement and personal courage. The test pilot became a cultural icon whose influence extended far beyond aviation circles. Tom Wolfe's book, The Right Stuff, played a crucial role in establishing Yeager's place in American mythology. The work portrayed him as the embodiment of test pilot courage and competence, the standard against which all others were measured. Later film adaptations brought his story to audiences who knew little about experimental flight, but understood heroism when they saw it portrayed on screen. His influence on aviation training and safety protocols proved more lasting than any popular recognition. The techniques he developed for managing high-performance aircraft under extreme conditions became standard curriculum for test pilots worldwide. His emphasis on systematic preparation and mechanical understanding influenced generations of aviators who faced their own unprecedented challenges. The broader impact of his achievements extended into fields far removed from aviation. The methodical approach to breaking the sound barrier became a model for addressing other seemingly impossible technical challenges. Industries ranging from automotive to computer technology adopted similar principles of incremental testing and risk management. Modern military aviation bears his fingerprints in countless ways that casual observers might never recognize. Current fighter aircraft incorporate technologies that trace their lineage directly to programs he helped develop. Training procedures for military pilots still reflect lessons learned during his experimental flights. Even spacecraft design shows influence from the rocket-powered aircraft he helped perfect. His later years brought recognition that had been impossible during the classified programs that defined his career. Military decorations, civilian honors, and academic recognition accumulated as the full scope of his contributions became publicly known. The farm boy who had never attended college received honorary degrees from universities that recognized achievement transcending formal education. The airport in his home state of West Virginia was renamed in his honor, creating a permanent connection between his legacy and the mountains that had shaped his character. The facility serves both as transportation infrastructure and memorial to one of aviation's most significant figures. Visitors can see displays that connect his childhood to his ultimate achievements. Perhaps most importantly, his story continues to inspire new generations of pilots and engineers who face their own impossible challenges. In an era of increasingly automated aircraft and computer-controlled systems, the human qualities he embodied, courage, mechanical intuition, and calm competence under pressure, remain as relevant as ever. The success of the Bell X-1 program thrust Yeager into the shadowy world of classified military aviation, where experimental aircraft pushed boundaries that conventional wisdom deemed impossible. The Cold War demanded technological superiority over Soviet adversaries, and America's most experienced test pilots found themselves at the center of programs so secret that their very existence would remain hidden for decades. Edwards Air Force Base in the 1950s had become the epicenter of American aerospace development. Here, in the harsh beauty of the Mojave Desert, engineers and pilots collaborated on aircraft designs that seemed more like science fiction than engineering reality. The Century Series fighters, F-100, F-101, F-102, F-104, F-105, and F-106, represented America's answer to Soviet military aviation, each one pushing specific aspects of performance to unprecedented levels. The F-104 Starfighter became one of Yeager's most challenging assignments. Lockheed's designers had sacrificed maneuverability for pure speed, creating what pilots called the missile with a man in it. The aircraft's needle-thin fuselage and tiny wings made it incredibly fast, but notoriously difficult to handle. While other pilots struggled with its unconventional characteristics, Yeager found ways to exploit its strengths while compensating for its weaknesses. His involvement with the NF-104A program represented the ultimate marriage of jet and rocket technology. This modified starfighter carried a supplementary rocket engine that could push it beyond the atmosphere itself, reaching altitudes where reaction control systems replaced conventional flight surfaces. The aircraft served as a bridge between atmospheric flight and space travel, preparing pilots for conditions they would encounter in orbit. On December 10, 1963, Yeager attempted to set an altitude record of 120,000 feet in the NF-104A. At 65,000 feet, the aircraft entered an uncontrollable flat spin, forcing him to eject at extreme altitude. The ejection seat's rocket motor burned his face and hands, causing injuries that would require months of recovery. Yet even this near-fatal accident provided valuable data about high-altitude flight that would benefit future spacecraft design. The classified nature of these programs meant that Yeager's most significant contributions remained hidden from public view. Intelligence agencies closely monitored Soviet aviation developments, and American test pilots provided crucial assessments of enemy capabilities based on their own experimental aircraft performance. This intelligence helped shape military strategy throughout the Cold War period. Soviet aircraft captured during various conflicts provided opportunities for direct comparison with American designs. Yeager flew several of these aircraft, including MiG fighters that had been acquired through intelligence operations. These flights revealed both strengths and weaknesses in Soviet design philosophy, information that influenced American aircraft development for years afterward. The psychological pressure of classified work created unique challenges for test pilots and their families. Spouses couldn't discuss their husbands' work with neighbors or friends. Children grew up knowing that their father's job involved constant danger, but could never learn specific details. The isolation inherent in security clearances added stress to relationships already strained by the dangers of experimental flight. The creation of NASA in 1958 fundamentally altered the landscape of experimental flight testing. What had once been the exclusive domain of military test pilots suddenly became civilian territory, with new selection criteria that emphasized academic credentials over proven flying ability. For pilots like Yeager, this shift represented a fundamental misunderstanding of what made effective test pilots. The educational requirements that excluded Yeager from astronaut consideration reflected bureaucratic thinking that prioritized credentials over capability. His lack of a college degree, irrelevant to his proven record of success in experimental flight, became an insurmountable obstacle to spaceflight. The irony was profound. The man who had broken the sound barrier and tested the most advanced aircraft in the world was deemed unqualified for programs that directly built upon his pioneering work. As commandant of the USAF Aerospace Research Pilot School at Edwards, Yeager found himself in the peculiar position of training astronauts he wasn't allowed to become. The school produced pilots who would go on to fly in Mercury, Gemini, and Apollo programs, yet their instructor remained earthbound due to administrative requirements that bore no relationship to actual job performance. The institutional rivalry between the Air Force and NASA created additional complications. Military leaders argued that spaceflight represented a natural extension of test pilot duties, requiring the same combination of technical knowledge and courage under pressure that had always defined experimental aviation. NASA administrators countered that space missions required different skills, particularly in engineering and scientific research. The controversy surrounding Ed Dwight, the first African-American pilot admitted to the aerospace school, revealed additional tensions within the system. Yeager reportedly opposed Dwight's inclusion, believing that political considerations rather than merit had influenced the selection process. The incident highlighted broader social conflicts that were reshaping American institutions during the civil rights era. Behind these public disputes lay deeper philosophical differences about the future of human spaceflight. Military test pilots like Yeager viewed spacecraft as aircraft that happened to operate in a different environment, requiring similar pilot skills adapted to new conditions. NASA's approach emphasized systems engineering and scientific methodology, treating astronauts more as highly trained technicians than traditional pilots. Yeager's own attitude toward astronauts reflected this philosophical divide. He considered them more passengers than pilots, noting that they exerted little direct control over their spacecraft compared to test pilots flying experimental aircraft. This perspective, while perhaps unfair to the genuine skills required for spaceflight, revealed the frustration of pilots who felt their hard-won expertise was being devalued by civilian bureaucracy. The long-term consequences of these conflicts extended far beyond individual careers. The military lost its most experienced test pilots to civilian agencies, while NASA gained personnel whose backgrounds emphasized academic achievement over operational experience. Both institutions suffered from this artificial division of talent and expertise. Long before Tom Wolfe immortalized him in The Right Stuff, Chuck Yeager had begun his transformation from working test pilot to cultural icon. The process started with military public relations efforts during the early Cold War, when American aviation achievements provided crucial propaganda value in the ideological struggle with Soviet communism. Early magazine articles and documentary films portrayed test pilots as modern knights, brave individuals who risked their lives to advance human knowledge and national security. Yeager's combination of rural origins, military heroism, and technological achievement made him an ideal representative of American values. His West Virginia drawl and matter-of-fact attitude toward danger resonated with audiences who saw in him proof that democracy could produce heroes as effective as any created by authoritarian regimes. Hollywood's treatment of test pilots during the 1950s and 60s established narrative patterns that would influence aviation portrayals for decades. Movies like The Right Stuff and Top Gun drew heavily on the mystique that Yeager and his contemporaries had created through their real-world achievements. The archetype of the cool, competent pilot who remained calm under extreme pressure became a standard character type in American entertainment. The commercialization of Yeager's image accelerated as his celebrity grew. Endorsement deals with aviation companies and consumer products capitalized on his reputation for technical expertise and personal integrity. His name became associated with precision, reliability, and performance, qualities that marketers found valuable for selling everything from aircraft instruments to automobiles. Television documentaries brought his story to audiences who had no direct interest in aviation, but were fascinated by tales of courage and achievement. These programs typically emphasized the dramatic aspects of test flying, while simplifying the technical complexities that made such achievements possible. The result was a popularized version of Yeager's career that captured public imagination while sometimes distorting historical reality. The publication of his autobiography provided an opportunity to present his own version of events, but it also contributed to the mythology surrounding his career. Readers found in his story confirmation of cherished beliefs about American individual achievement and national superiority. The book became not just biography, but cultural artifact, reflecting broader social values through the lens of one man's extraordinary experiences. International recognition followed as Yeager's achievements became known worldwide. Foreign aviation communities acknowledged his contributions to flight testing methodology and aircraft development. His influence extended beyond national boundaries, inspiring pilots and engineers in countries that had their own experimental aviation programs. The darker aspects of celebrity, loss of privacy, constant scrutiny, and commercial exploitation, created challenges that Yeager handled with characteristic directness. He remained accessible to aviation enthusiasts while maintaining clear boundaries between his public persona and private life. This balance helped preserve his authentic image even as his fame continued to grow. Retirement from active flying in 1975 marked not an ending, but a transition to new forms of contribution to aviation. Yeager continued his association with experimental flight through consulting work, speaking engagements, and mentorship of younger pilots. His perspectives on risk management and aircraft development, honed by decades of dangerous flying, remained valuable to industries pushing new technological boundaries. His observations about modern aviation reflected both admiration for technical progress and concern about the human elements being lost in increasingly automated systems. Computer-controlled flight systems could prevent many types of accidents, but they also reduced pilot involvement in ways that Yeager found troubling. He worried that over-reliance on automation might produce pilots who lacked the instinctive understanding of aircraft behavior that had enabled earlier generations to survive unexpected emergencies. The evolution of test pilot training programs incorporated many principles that Yeager had developed through experience. Systematic approaches to risk assessment, emphasis on mechanical understanding, and the importance of remaining calm under pressure became standard elements of modern flight test curricula. Yet he noted that contemporary pilots often lacked the broad mechanical background that had served his generation so well. His advice to young pilots emphasized fundamentals that transcended specific aircraft types or technological eras. Understanding how things work mechanically provided the foundation for adapting to new systems as they emerged. Developing judgment about acceptable risk levels required experience that could only be gained through progressively more challenging flying assignments. Most importantly, maintaining respect for the dangers inherent in experimental flight prevented the overconfidence that killed careless pilots. The philosophical questions raised by his career continued to influence debates about human factors in aviation safety. How much risk was acceptable in the pursuit of technological advancement? What balance should be struck between pushing boundaries and protecting valuable personnel? These questions had no easy answers, but Yeager's example provided one model for approaching them thoughtfully. His reflections on the Cold War period revealed both pride in achievements and sadness about opportunities lost. The classified nature of much experimental work meant that valuable lessons learned couldn't be shared more broadly. Competition between military services and civilian agencies had sometimes prevented optimal use of personnel and resources. Yet the pressure of international competition had also driven innovations that might never have emerged in peacetime. The transformation of Edwards Air Force Base from experimental testing facility to historical monument symbolized broader changes in American aviation. Many of the programs that had defined Yeager's career were now museum exhibits, their contributions to current technology often invisible to casual observers. Yet the principles developed during those pioneering years continued to influence aircraft design and pilot training worldwide. Looking back on a career that spanned from propeller-driven fighters to rocket-powered aircraft, Yeager saw both continuity and change in aviation's evolution. The fundamental challenges of flight, controlling aircraft in three-dimensional space, managing mechanical systems under stress, making split-second decisions with incomplete information, remained constant even as technology advanced. Success still required the same combination of technical knowledge, practical experience, and personal courage that had always defined effective pilots. The boy from the hills of West Virginia had become more than a test pilot or fighter ace. He had evolved into a symbol of what American society could produce when it combined individual talent with national purpose. His legacy extends beyond aviation into the broader question of what ordinary people can achieve when called upon to attempt the extraordinary. The sound barrier that seemed so formidable in 1947 now represents just one of countless obstacles that humans have overcome through combination of courage, skill, and determination. Chuck Yeager's life demonstrated that the most significant barriers exist not in the physical world, but in the limitations we place upon ourselves. Breaking through them requires not just technical knowledge, but the willingness to risk everything on the possibility of success. Today, as aviation pushes toward hypersonic flight and space travel becomes increasingly routine, the principles he established remain fundamental to progress. Systematic testing, mechanical understanding, and personal courage under extreme conditions. These qualities will continue to define those who push the boundaries of human capability, regardless of the specific challenges they face. The farm boy who became a fighter ace, then a test pilot, and finally a legend, proves that in democratic societies, extraordinary achievement can emerge from the most ordinary backgrounds. His story belongs not just to aviation history, but to the larger narrative of what free people can accomplish when they combine individual talent with collective purpose. In that sense, Chuck Yeager's legacy extends far beyond the cockpit of any aircraft he ever flew, reaching into the fundamental questions of human potential and national character that continue to shape our world today.